All right. Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to today's webinar, How Purpose-Led Brands Win Customers and Stand the Test of Time, where we'll be talking about the advantages to a purpose-led approach and how to get started. We have some incredible panelists joining us today. Amanda Dorenberg, President at the Canadian Out-of-Home Marketing and Measurement Bureau, Kelly McInenly, CMO at Cerebelly, Brian Murray, Executive Creative Director at Zulu Alpha Kilo, and I'm Aliya Sharif, Marketing Manager here at Broadsign, and I'll be your host today. For those of you who haven't come across Broadsign before, we provide solutions which make it easier for agencies, advertisers, and media owners to buy and sell digital out-of-home campaigns. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to make sure everyone knows what to expect from today's webinar. The panel discussion should go somewhere in the 35 to 40-minute range, after which we'll have about 5 to 10 minutes for audience Q&A. So if at any point you have a question for any of our panelists, just use that Q&A tool and we'll get to as many questions as we can after the panel discussion. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and the on-demand version will be available to all registrants later this week. So without further ado, let's meet our panelists. Amanda, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen to this important topic. My name is Amanda Dorenberg. I am currently the president of COMMB. COMMB is the Canadian Out-of-Home Marketing and Measurement Bureau. So essentially, we provide the currency by which the out-of-home industry transacts upon. So your circulation and impression values that you see in the out-of-home space. And we also provide marketing services for the industry to raise awareness on the value of out-of-home, its efficacy, and its importance in the overall media mix. My background is 15 years coming from the media owner side before I took over COMMB in November of 2020. So it's been an exciting couple of years and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks. And Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly, and I'm currently the Chief Marketing Officer of Cerebelly, which is the only baby food designed for brain development. I'm a career marketer, 22 years in the field, but I was compelled to join this mission when Dr. Persner reached out looking for a way to spread the word about this very unique innovation that she, as a neurosurgeon, had developed. And I'd never been involved with such a mission-led, mission-driven brand. And I was compelled to join the journey. I'm excited to share what that has been like and what it has entailed. So after a career to this point in consumer packaged goods, primarily with a bit of time in restaurant, shifting to something entirely different that starts with the formation of a baby's brain. Very interesting transition, and a lot of the old standards for the traditional way of marketing apply, and there are a few different turns in the road that this mandate requires.
Thanks, Kelly. Last but not least, Brian.
Hello, my name is Brian Murray. I am Executive Creative Director at Zulu Alpha Kilo. We're a creative agency with offices in Toronto, Vancouver, and New York City. I work out of the Toronto office, mostly out of this dining room. I've been fortunate enough in my career to work on many campaigns for purpose-led brands. For years, I worked on Unilever, so I've worked on the campaign for Real Beauty for Dove. I've worked on launching Hellman's food recovery program in Canada, Doveman Plus Care and the paternity leave cause. I've worked on Kimberly-Clark Huggies No Baby on Hugging program. Home Equity Bank is a current client of ours. We work closely with their support of the Royal Canadian Legion. And I've worked on Reckitt brands, Rinse, Skip the Rinse, where they're trying to save water. So I have a real depth of experience launching and working on pre-existing platforms for purpose-led brands. Thanks.
Wonderful. Before we jump into the questions I have for you all today, I wanted to provide a bit of background and set the stage for the topics that we'll be covering. So let's start with, what does purpose-led mean? People have their own definitions, but maybe this is one at a high level that we can all agree on. a value-focused strategy used by an organization to communicate its alignment with certain values or initiatives for the greater good. This, of course, is not a new concept. Companies have been taking this approach for some time now, but it has been making its way to the forefront recently since the global pandemic and continuing uncertain times, which has resulted in consumers expecting more and more from the brands that they buy from. Specifically, brands are expected to have a value-based purpose, to live that purpose in everything they do, and to communicate it consistently and effectively. The research shows that consumers are choosing to buy from companies that stand for a purpose that they personally identify with, that reflects their values and beliefs. In fact, 79% have abandoned a business in favor of one that better fits their values. So it's no longer an option for brands to take a purpose-led approach, but has very much become an expectation. Brands with a clear purpose have more loyal customers and can typically weather the storm of unstable economic times. Here at Broadsign, we recently ran a survey among US consumers that found that over half of respondents believe it's important that a brand's values align with theirs when considering a product or service. And when asked which values are most important, the #1 answer was transparency and trust. Like most things, this is easier said than done. So today we'll explore how top brands have been able to do this successfully, the most effective tactics to communicate your purpose-led strategy in an authentic way, and some pitfalls to avoid. Brian, let's start with you. Given the changes in consumer expectations of brands, how have you seen the strategy around purpose-led branding evolve over time, especially with brands you've worked with like Dove that have managed to continue to do this successfully?
I would say that it used to be much more of a rare occurrence for brands to go to market as purpose-led. Even as recently as when the pandemic hit, many brands started weighing in on the pandemic, and there was a lot of consumer backlash because some of them did it incorrectly, and it was seen as opportunistic. And then fast forward, whatever it was, a year and a half later, when the George Floyd protests were happening, there were actually a lot of people out there demanding that brands take a stand and let their opinions be known and where they stood on that. And there was even a website that was keeping a scorecard of which brands had actually denounced the police and which had overtly said Black Lives Matter. So the climate had shifted to one where brands were often tentative to weigh in and be purpose-led, to one where it was almost an expectation had arisen. And with that, brands are always looking for ways to cut through the clutter, have more of a share of voice. But with so many purpose-led brands out there, it's actually become a bit of a crowded space. And while many brands before used to be able to say, okay, what we're going to do is talk about sustainability and inclusion. And then that was enough, it seemed, that they could break through and be like a really prominent purpose-led brand. But that's a very crowded space now. And increasingly, the problem is brands saying, what's our niche going to be? What's our purpose going to be? When they start retrofitting purpose to their existing brand, they really have to, it becomes a strategic deep dive for them to even figure out sometimes what their niche is going to be. So then you get brands like Dove Men Plus Care, who I worked on the Canadian launch of their global purpose, which is paternity leave. And how do they arrive at that? Really, it's rooted in the name of the product, Dove Men Plus Care. So care being such an important part of a man. And then you look at that and, there's a bit of post-rationalization. There's a bit of artfulness at arriving at that purpose. And then you compare that to, say, as I mentioned earlier, Finish, and their whole product. The idea is that you put it in your dishwasher and you can skip the rinse. So the product inherently saves water. So their purpose has become saving water. So it's become this exercise now where brands are actually seeking out this purpose, and they're trying to figure out which ones work for them. Because even Dove now is increasingly having a hard time activating against their own purpose because it's become such a crowded space. There's been so many other brands that have come in with a very similar opinion on things. So that's does that answer the question? Or
yeah, no, for sure. And I think this relates really well to Kelly's work with Cerebelly too. I think that's also a space that's really crowded in terms of transparency and sustainability. I think in our discussions before, Kelly, you mentioned that that's very much become table stakes, like Brian mentioned. Kelly, I'm curious, with Cerebelly, how have you differentiated yourself from others in this category?
Well, it's interesting. I absolutely relate to what Brian is speaking of, because we certainly did that again and again when I was working at PepsiCo. We had these legacy brands that we were trying to reverse into purposefulness. Cerebelly is quite different in that it's a startup, and it was born with a purpose, created by a surgeon, a neurosurgeon, with the sole purpose of improving the way we feed our babies to promote optimal brain development. So the purpose is already baked into it. PepsiCo was great in terms of aligning with other purposes and finding ways to drive societal good. Cerebelly is underpinned by societal good, period. We're trying to give every baby the shot at the best possible future. So it's exciting to be part of that. And it's different than the other players because most of the other players are quite seasoned as well in the space, and they are aligning themselves with different purposes versus being born of a purpose to change the way we feed our babies. And we would love really to create a movement and for all other baby food brands to be nutritionally equal to us. That is the scientific approach. We want the whole community to move with our way of thinking. So we would love, we love every time a brand increases its nutritional content. Whenever one of the other startups in our similar space gets a funding round approved, our founder sends a letter of congratulations and thanks. We don't see ourselves as competing with others in the space. And I think that's the difference when you're born of a purpose and a mission. The mission is for all babies to have superior nutrition and the best chance at optimal brain development. So we want everyone to move that way, homemade baby food makers, competitors alike. It's a different type of feeling, and it governs a different type of behavior.
And we know that the medium is just as important as the message. Amanda, when it comes to trust and transparency, how is out of home in general typically viewed by consumers? And maybe how have you seen that change over time?
It's a very good question. And it's a question that I actually love and adore, because out of home has long-standing roots in media and has been seen for decades and decades as one of the most trusted media formats. For some reason, consumers and brands feel as though these larger than life structures inherently provide trust to a brand. It's just, they presume that it costs a lot of money to get up on these billboards, that brands are investing in this. So there's an inherent feeling of trust that comes with it from a consumer's perspective. I think what's happening now, particularly post-pandemic, if you will, brands during the pandemic certainly heavied up on B2C, direct consumer engagements. They were focused specifically on digital platforms, native platforms, search, social, et cetera, really trying to speak to the consumer while we're stuck inside OTT, streaming, TV, radio, sort of some of those classic mediums. And then out of home was sort of parked for a minute because we were all not out of our homes. But as we emerge and we're seeing this tiredness from a digital perspective, this exhaustion from streaming services, we're seeing a lack of trust in certain social advertisements, because there's plenty of research out there that's showcasing that influencer marketing is declining because there is a lack of trust from a consumer perspective on what's actually being advertised. And so more and more focus is shifting back to out of home as one of the more traditional media formats that has a lot of digital enhancements as well. So you can take the classic super board structures or static inventory, but you can also apply the same type of targeting and contextual insights that you would apply in the online space, where they're losing certain trust components into the now offline space of digital out of home, where you have that contextual component, but you still have the level of transparency and trust. And I think coming from the COMMB side, the transparency and trust factor is of utmost importance to us, and that's why we exist as a body, right? We're a third-party entity that is here to provide measurement services for the industry, and that inherently provides the buy side as well as the sell side with a neutral party that's giving a effective measurement and ultimately providing some sort of ROI for the brands that are investing in the platform.
And Kelly, you kind of touched a little bit on Cerebelly's sort of unique approach when kind of differentiating yourself from some of your competitors. Although, you mentioned that you're a science-first company, it seems like you've put a lot of focus on how you want your customers to feel, which seemed to really resonate with parents. Can you talk a little bit about this approach that you have to branding and marketing?
Sure. When you're trying to change core beliefs about how we feed and raise our children, there's nothing more personal than that. And people really have baked in ideas about what is best based on perhaps how their parents raised them or different things that they've read. So we really need to nudge people gently along with us versus saying what you've done is entirely wrong, tear up the playbook, you're a terrible parent, move on. That's not at all the sentiment. We look at it as, my parents' parents would have drank martinis and smoked cigarettes while pregnant. We now know that that's not a great move. When I was growing up, I drove back and forth to Florida in the back window of the station wagon. We now know that's not a great idea. So the collective knowledge and wisdom about what's best for babies and children is always evolving. And we just want this to be no different than that. It's just a nudge forward. Once again, no one did anything wrong in the past. But once you know that there are 60 nutrients required for brain development, it's hard to unknow it. So to invite that conversation with parents, we've really reached out with a campaign all around parenting as an art. And it's their sacred art. We don't want to mess with that, but Cerebelly is science. There really is a scientific, one true way to feed a developing brain. So bring all your artfulness as to how you get the food into your baby, your different routines and rituals and special times with your child. And just know that we've handled the rest. You don't have to worry about the formulation, the science, how it was made, what went into it. We've taken care of that with the highest standard and a degree of parental care, because Dr. Persner is also a mother of 3. So finding that soft line so that we don't seem like hard science or frankenfood. Everything we do is rooted in real science, and that's critical to us, and we will evolve as the science evolves. But we soften by using user-generated content from all of our consumers or our employees in every consumer communication. So we're anchoring on that user-generated content, that special moment with child, and then landing on the science that can sort of take one more concern or worry off a parent's plate.
Yeah, I really like the focus on the parenting is an art. I feel like that's really unique in this space, and kind of going back to being purpose-led. I think the emotional kind of component to it is a really big one. And oftentimes when consumers are really loyal to a brand, it's because they make them feel a certain way. So thanks for sharing that. Brian, you mentioned a few brands that you've worked with that have really successfully taken on this purpose-led approach. When a brand comes to you to develop a campaign around a particular purpose or brand value, where do you start?
Well, in a perfect world, like Kelly was saying, a brand has already got the purpose baked in, like a Patagonia or something, because consumers can really see the authenticity in that. But when a known brand has been kicking around for a while and suddenly now it's going to assign itself a purpose, there is a chance that consumers may look at it and think it's just being opportunistic. Maybe you're trying to take advantage of something that's trendy. So you do have to be very mindful of that. And so you do have to make sure that the purpose is one that makes sense for that brand. For example, Always or Kotex would have a very different purpose than, say, Harley Davidson. So it has to be in the right sandbox. And then beyond that, you have to make sure that you're doing something about the problem. So it's not you're raising awareness of the problem and you're piggybacking on the problem. Different marketers, marketing organizations have different terms for this. At Mondelez, they say, let's embrace story doing, not storytelling. And Unilever they refer to that as brand do's, not brand say. So you really, when you're talking about purpose-led marketing, you want to make the situation better. And as I said too, increasingly now, as purpose-led marketing is a more crowded field, brands are taking on these more niche problems. So, for example, Hellmann's, for years, they were championing the real food movement because they use real ingredients. And years ago, their competition was Miracle Whip and who knows what's in there. So they had the real food movement for a long time. And then globally, Unilever said for all their brands, they're going to assign a purpose. And for Hellmann's, they agreed that it's going to be food waste. They're going to stop food waste. So when I was working on Hellmann's, they shifted from the real food movement to battling food waste. And it was a global purpose, which is nice that as an organization, they align globally and they're trying to take steps to fix that. But it didn't resonate equally in every market. Certain markets are very aware that there's food shortages, but in Canada, for the most part, Canadians didn't really perceive food waste as that big a problem. So we had to have a real element of education in our communications as well. And sometimes you don't need that in communications, but for this particular one, we did. So we had to educate people on the problem of food waste, that half the food that comes from farms in Canada is wasted. And the majority of that is done through residential waste. And also that 5 million Canadians are living with food insecurity, meaning that they, at least once a week, they don't know where their next meal is coming from. So we have all this food being wasted and 5 million Canadians living with food insecurity. So we had to get this all across. And we had to do it in a way that's going to get people's attention. So that's another thing, right? When you come along and you're trying to educate people, you're trying to make them aware of this cause, we still can't forget like 90%, people debate 89%, 90% of advertising is completely ignored. So we still always want to be in that 10%. We have to do it in a breakthrough way that consumers are going to remember, that it's going to be salient and attributed to the brand. So to launch we deemed the food waste cause in Canada the real food rescue, and we started a food recovery program with MLSE. So we made sure that we're doing something about it. In the first year, in the first 2 years, we recovered about 300,000 meals that were going to be thrown away after games from the corporate boxes at MLSE. But people were not that excited about, hearing about putting food in Tupperware and then taking it off to Second Harvest. So we had to tell the story in a way that would engage consumers. So to launch it, we went to all these Sobeys and we found food that was all going to be thrown out. And then we fed people at a Toronto FC match. And then only at halftime revealed that all that food that they had eaten and enjoyed was recovered food, because it's not food waste until you waste it. So that made a really good launch piece. And then when lockdown happened, we followed it up. We made an Animal Crossing island where people could bring their turnips in the game, and then we donate in the real world, and we got to see the people who are benefiting from it. So again, I guess logically need a purpose that makes sense. It has to be authentic. They have to be doing something about it. And then you still have to engage consumers in an emotional way that's going to get their attention. Otherwise, the efforts are not going to go noticed.
Mm-hmm. I love that food waste campaign. I feel like free food is always a good way to get people's attention. So one thing, we've noticed with purpose-led brands is that they're really effective at communicating a consistent brand purpose across multiple channels. Amanda, you touched on this a little bit, but could you maybe walk us through how an omni-channel media strategy can really help support this type of approach?
For sure. I think, to Brian's point earlier and to Kelly's point earlier, first and foremost, it has to be authentic. Whatever the message is, has to be authentic. And I think it starts with creative. But when we're thinking about a strategy in the sense of executional strategy, there are certain channels that are going to be more aligned with the KPIs that you're looking for from a purpose-led campaign specifically. And I think that if the campaign's key KPI is really to get the message out about the purpose-led brand or the initiative specifically, and it's not so much on a product sales or this and that, the strategy has to be looked at very differently than just a traditional brand awareness campaign where you could, your biggest KPI is going to be reach. So you're going to look at mass mediums, you're going to look at out of home, you're going to look at online, you're probably going to combine search and social and native, et cetera, TV, radio, et cetera. But we really have to look at the audience and, you know, the brand's positioning, if you will, and the authenticity behind it, to Brian's earlier point. So from an omni-channel perspective, I think it's great that we have so many tools that we can leverage, like MMM platforms, being able to do media mix modeling and sort of recommend various different strategies and outputs as to where we put these ad placements. But I do think, particularly when we're speaking about purpose-led campaigns and initiatives, the strategy has to be very tactical. It has to be very hands-on. So we can't just push a button and, you know, distribute omni-channel content, you know, programmatically across multiple channels. We want to build out that strategy where perhaps, you know, a programmatic digital out of home or programmatic traditional programmatic campaign could work to gain some of the broader awareness. But the more tactical areas where we need that sentiment, we need an emotional reaction, we have to get very contextual. So we really need to understand consumer audience segmentation. We need to understand behavioral targeting. We need to know, you know, where our target audience is dwelling and at what time. We need to look at this on an hourly basis sometimes. It's very granular, but in order for us to actually speak to these consumers in a moment in time where that message that Brian and his team and that Kelly and her team spend so much time curating and building, in order for it to be received by the consumer at that right moment when it hits the heartstrings, the contextual component is very critical. And that's where things like, you know, behavioral segmentation and audience segmentations and understanding your core demographic of that particular brand becomes so important. And then we can move that into, you know, digital out of home platforms where content is being curated on a specific interval based on how the consumer is moving about their day to day. So perhaps, you know, for Cerebelly, the beaches could be a great area because there's a lot of, you know, families there. There's a lot of young families, and contextually, that could be a good neighborhood and a good demographic that you're looking at. So, you know, you're looking at things differently and more tactically, I think, with purpose-led campaigns when it comes to omni-channel than we are with a traditional sort of omni-channel approach. It's gotta resonate with the consumer, right? So context is key, I think, in this case from an omni-channel perspective. Maybe my other panelists want to add some thoughts.
Kelly, Brian, anything, any other contributions on any other thoughts on this topic?
Certainly from our standpoint, we're about meeting parents where they're at. So that's where they are getting information about how to feed and raise their child, as well as where they would like to buy the food. Accessibility is a core pillar for us. So we want to be accessible in any media forum or parenting group that they find themselves within, and then also available to be purchased anywhere that they want to purchase baby food. For some parents, they define convenience as a direct-to-consumer order that shows up on your doorstep every 2 weeks, like clockwork. Others define convenience as being able to walk into a Walmart and do your diaper shop and your bottle shop and your gear shop and your food shop all at once. We're trying to meet them where they're at. So I really relate to the omni-channel approach to both marketing messaging as well as availability. Mm-hmm. When you're trying to create ambassadors, you have to find them everywhere.
You have to find them everywhere, and the context is key, right? Like, you spend so much time as brands and as creative agencies building out what that message is. If we lack the tactical strategy on the execution side, it could fall flat, right? And that's where I think from an omni-channel perspective, context is so important. The demographic, the lifestyle, the segmentation, and really understanding how your target audience moves about their day to day. You can't just focus on one platform. You know, they're out of their home, they're traveling to a Walmart, perhaps. So out of home might be a great context, but then as soon as they're back inside, maybe you need to shift to OTT and streaming, or maybe, you know, some social content is key there. The omni-channel approach, I think, particularly with purpose-driven campaigns, is very critical.
Well, we did a study and we were shocked to find that the number one place parents were learning about how and what to feed their baby was at the retail shelf. And that's actually how Dr. Persner learned that things were woefully lacking what she thought a growing mind needed. But that's where the majority of them are getting the information about what to buy. And then after that was online in parenting groups and forums, in their Facebook.
Wow.
whatever it might be. So it really changed the way we were thinking about our media mix and put a whole lot more emphasis on that in-store communication. We could have resisted that notion, but we just have to embrace it and say as much as we can about, you know, the first 5 years and their importance in brain development in that space.
So interesting. I find the neuroscience behind your brand very, very fascinating. I think it's very interesting.
It's a little intimidating working for a neurosurgeon, I'll tell you that.
I have my own experience with neurosurgeons. I had brain surgery, so anything to do with neuroscience, like, truly intrigues me. I'm fascinated.
Wow. I'm glad it worked out well.
Yes. So am I.
Kelly, you mentioned meeting customers where they are. It seems like Cerebelly is extremely customer focused. We know that a really important component to this type of purpose-led strategy is being able to adapt to the changing needs of customers and really meeting them where they are. How have you, with Cerebelly, been able to ensure that you're constantly listening to customers and adapting and remaining agile?
Well, definitely when you're part of a startup, every single consumer matters in a very important way, because you have such a small base of business from which to start, and you need those ambassadors to start doing some of the heavy lifting of communication and spreading the word. So while we have found it a challenging mission to both educate parents on what they didn't know about what should be in baby food, as well as just let them know that Cerebelly has these things. It's two different communication pieces. We've tried to remain very open to them educating us. You know, they let us know loud and clear about 18 months ago that we just didn't have enough flavor variety. They loved our product. They would give it to their child and nothing else, but there just wasn't enough on the parenting as an art side to keep their child interested, or enough flavors that they accepted. So we put out, 6 new flavors of puree directly in response to that. So that's not exciting new science in Dr. Persner's opinion. It's the practical side of parenting. And if they hadn't told us that we didn't have enough, we would have said, hey, they have 16 nutrients, there's a few flavors, go to town. So now we're able to offer something that is more likely to get into their baby, because we have had to accept it doesn't matter how perfect the science is. If you can't get it into the child, you've absolutely made no progress on the mission. And I should share at this point that there's nothing supplemental about Cerebelly. It's just vegetables, seeds, maitake mushrooms, and a bit of fruit for acceptability. There's nothing special about it. It's just a combination of things that the average
plant-based
doesn't know. Plant-based. So we launched with all plant-based. And then part of what we heard from consumers is there are omnivore families too. So we launched 3 bone broth SKUs to satisfy those. But out of respect for the plant-based families who might have been offended, we added a Shop Vegan button to our site. So you can go in, hit Shop Vegan, and you will only see our core.
Very cool. Very cool.
But we're just always listening. They've told us that certain product formats are preferred by them. They've called in and they've asked, why did you launch in a pouch? And whenever they ask sort of critically about any aspect of our product, we tell them the thinking behind it at the time, but we ask what would they like to see? And once we start to see trends in those spaces, we're happy to do it. We've been trying to encourage families off of the pouches. We would like to do something a lot more sustainable, or at least recyclable or compostable. I mean, it was glass jars when I was feeding my kids and they were 100% curbside. So we've asked them, would you be okay with a larger format tetra type, not a tetra, but a larger format that would allow at least less waste or less caps per serving? Or would you be okay going back to glass? And we're trying to find that sweet spot that allows them to, again, have the practical convenience that a parent needs, but also set kids up for the best possible future, not just through their brain development, but through the world they're going to inherit. So we're always asking. We reach out once a quarter to all of our brand subscribers. We have a D2C channel as well as being available in retail. And we have the Cerebelly Brain Trust, and we send them questions that we are just curious about every quarter, and they give us rich answers. We also reach out to a non-Cerebelly panel of just Gen Pop US parents every quarter, and we ask them questions, the same questions, to see where there are differences and to see where we might be missing better ways of telling the story, missing things that they reject about us, or missing any discomfort we might be creating with the way that we're messaging. We want to keep it very friendly and encouraging, and about being a little bit better every day versus anyone worrying about what they did to their brain. I mean, Brian, your comment about Miracle Whip, I was raised on like 90% Miracle Whip and Velveeta.
I was too.
This is a little bit of penance I'm doing.
I drank the Kool-Aid, the Unilever Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Amanda, you talked a little bit about the real advantages to out of home. I'm curious if there are any sort of pitfalls that you've seen, when leveraging out of home that brands should avoid. And conversely, I guess on a more positive note, if there are any examples of a out of home execution that you've seen that was particularly impactful.
A great question, Aliya. So I think on the pitfall side of things is creative. A lot of people just repurpose creative for out of home, but they don't look at it as as its own channel. They're taking, a magazine ad and trying to retrofit it into an out of home asset. And, they're very different aspect ratios. Out of home, you need simple messaging, you need bold, impactful, creative. And oftentimes I find that is one of the areas that we see, particularly with campaigns that could be so impactful, so effective. Like, wow, that creative, just like there's too many words on it. So we have best practices and guidelines and whatnot to help the industry out from a creative perspective. But I think that tends to be one of the pitfalls, because oftentimes the strategy side of things or creative, it's expensive to create creative. We know the time and energy that goes into creating all sorts of different assets for various different omni-channel campaigns. But I would encourage everyone to look at the out of home asset that they're engaging within, whether it's a large format, whether it's a small format, whether it's a transit shelter, whether it's indoor, and really curate the content for those particular assets themselves, and not try to retrofit something that's existing into something that really isn't going to serve the purpose to get that message out. And I hope my creative
clients like more
here.
messaging, not less messaging.
Right. In terms of a campaign that was really successful, I think I actually have a video. There was a really great experience with Luminato. It was this year. I'm not sure if anybody had the chance to take a look at it, but there's a Canadian photographer, very well-known Canadian photographer, Edward Bertinsky, and he was launching a photographic series called In the Wake of Progress. And during Luminato, they took over Young Dundas Square. And I'll credit, the video comes from Branded Cities, but I will call out that it was a collaboration between multiple media owners. So all of the digital out-of-home assets at Young Dundas Square were synchronized and streaming for, I think it was like a 30+ minute execution. Even the Young BIA, they have their own internal screens at Young Dundas Square. Everything within the square was synchronized for the launch of this campaign, and it was a beautiful execution. It was a partnership with Bullfrog Power. So I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with Bullfrog Power, but it's Canada's largest green energy provider. And what the purpose of this particular campaign was to showcase the basically an insider's look at climate change and the effects of climate change through the lens of Edward Bertinsky. And he's got such a beautiful eye, and the visuals are just so stunning. But what I found really interesting was not only is it a purpose-led campaign in the sense that there's a green partnership behind it with Bullfrog. It's focused on climate change and climate action and the effects of worldly existence to climate change and to water, clean water, energy, the creatures that live in our universe. But also the collaboration from a digital out-of-home perspective. This was one of the most impactful executions. If you think of Young Dundas Square, you've got Astral's large wraparound screen that's on the east corner, massive digital screen. You've got Branded Cities who have the bulk of the north and west sides, and then you've got Outfront's tower in the center of the square, and then within the Young BIA, all of their digital screens within the square as well were all synchronized with this content. And there was a performance happening in the square, so there was live artists, there was dancers. It was truly it was a heartwarming execution. So I think that's one that comes very promptly to mind.
Okay.
I do think we have a video. Do we?
Yes, let's take a look at that right now.
Branded Cities joined forces with Luminato Festival Toronto and brought Edward Bertinsky's In the Wake of Progress to Yonge and Dundas. Our inventory of assets brought this breathtaking artistic showcase to life on the largest full-motion digital spectaculars in Canada. Crowds at the square and viewers across Canada watched, entranced, as the awe-inspiring film and photography displayed on our larger-than-life screens dominated the heart of Toronto.
So again, while the video did come from Branded Cities, you could see within the video on the side, you know, the astral board and some of the out front boards in the center. But it was just a great example of collaboration and execution. And if you think about the technical aptitude that's inclined, you've got 4 different media providers operating likely on 4 different ad serving platforms that all have to synchronize that to ensure that the content is displaying at the same time and fully synchronized across that. It was truly spectacular.
Yeah, and the imagery was so beautiful, especially at that scale.
It was, yeah, it was really great.
So this is actually a really great segue. Brian actually has a case study of a campaign that he worked on. I think that really demonstrates some of these different elements that we've been speaking about. So we'll hear from Brian about the process behind the campaign as well as some of the results he saw. So Brian, I will turn it back to you.
First, I'll say that the biggest, most successful, impactful, purpose-led campaigns that I've been a part of, out of home has been a big part of them. And even though in some regards, if you look at just reach, and there might be more, I don't know, I don't want to misspeak, but seemingly efficient ways, but I don't think they're as effective or impactful because for me, out of home and TV in particular, those 2 media channels, they do something that a lot of other channels don't. And I think that an example is people buy a Mercedes-Benz because it's luxurious and fancy, but they also buy it because they know other people know that Mercedes-Benz is luxurious and fancy. So when you put a purpose-led cause up on a billboard, it does something that's very important. It does cultural imprinting, where not only do I know that the brand stands for that, now I know that my friends have seen that and they know that the brand stands for that. And when I associate myself with the values of that brand and my friends see me associating myself with the values of that brand, they know. So it's a little bit of signaling there, but it's just a real consumer behavior. And it's really important because if you're just constantly targeting a small scale through Instagram or something, and you know, you have this really virtuous purpose-led campaign, and then the next ad in the exact same channel is like for custom-made socks or a shirt that has your name on it. It just really doesn't have the same impact. So yeah, the most successful campaigns, purpose-led, that I have worked on definitely have had a big out-of-home component, and this case is another one. So this case study, so currently I work at Zulu Alpha Kilo, and this is something I did at my previous agency when I was Chief Creative Officer of Ogilvy Canada. So let's transport ourselves back now to March 2020. Our pesky little friend here on the next slide has now just hit the scene. Everything's shutting down. Hospitals are overloaded. Many brands now are starting to wade into the conversation. And this is an example. Earlier I was saying, you got to do brand do, you got to do brand acts, you got to do story, not storytelling, story doing. But a lot of brands waded into the pandemic discussion very quickly, and they started just trying to raise awareness for social distancing in these cutesy little clever ways that weren't actually making a real world impact. And there was backlash in social media. People saw through it a bit. And I know what it was too. It's like, for the most part, it was people working in creative agencies like me, trying to be clever, trying to maybe win some awards or something. So they're like, hey, look at the M's, they're separated. Look at the Audi rings, they're separated, Volkswagen. And it got a really negative response. So in the midst of this, then Dove reached out to us, Dove Canada at this point, with a very simple brief. They said, as Dove, let's go to the next slide. So Dove reached out. Dove asked us, Let's go. What can we do to help? That was the real brief. So what's happening right now? What can we do to help? So we went off, and it was a very small team because timelines were very tight. We had to get things to market quickly. So creatively, it was myself as Chief Creative Officer, and then Christian Horsfall and Pam Danowski were the team. Started brainstorming different things that they could do to help. And I'm going to show you the actual presentation that we gave them. Like, probably don't need to show you all this, but people find this kind of interesting. So I figured I'd just throw it in. So this is the PDF that we presented to Dove, initially to Dove Canada, I think on a Friday, and then it got to global. It was presented to Dove Global on the Wednesday. And we presented two ideas. One was supporting people who are staying home, but anyway, that idea wasn't as good. So this is the idea that was made. The Courage is Beautiful campaign was, let's keep going. The previous slide had my setup on it, but it doesn't matter. So interestingly, we thought that I always had a personal bias against the Campaign for Real Beauty in that it only acknowledged physical beauty, and it never went so far as to talk about what people did as being beautiful. So I was really happy that we got to present this idea and that it was embraced, because it did evolve the Campaign for Real Beauty to include action. So you had all these people, brave people, frontline healthcare workers working on the front lines, battling COVID, putting themselves at risk, covered in all this gear, masks on their faces. At the end of the day, their faces were ravaged by the masks. And all these posts were being put up on Instagram by the nurses themselves, because film crews, photojournalists, they couldn't even get into the hospitals. The hospitals were all locked down. So the world was seeing these images on social media. So we decided it would be great if Dove could do something to support these healthcare workers. Dove thought it was great because Dove makes soap, and that's exactly what the frontline healthcare workers needed. And Unilever factories also had the capacity to make hand sanitizer. So they thought, that's great. That could be our due. We'll support them with soap. And then through media channels, we're going to support them as well, just so everybody, knows that we're supporting them. And so we presented this deck to them. You could see already, I don't know if you've seen the commercial, but we already had found many of the images. We just went in through Instagram, we searched for hashtags, we started pulling the images, we put this deck together. This was an example of this is what it could look like on Instagram. And we can kind of power through this. We're going to show the faces of these frontline healthcare workers, and we're just simply going to write "Courage is Beautiful" over it. Again, many of these faces actually ended up in the final campaign. So this is more samples that we had pulled. Just keep going. And then we actually expanded beyond frontline healthcare workers for a bit. We're like, maybe bus drivers? We pull it out and then we put it back in. No, we agreed the focus needed to be specific. This was another one that we had in the deck. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if we somehow got the coverage in the New York Times? We thought that was a really lofty goal. Let's keep going. We thought that this full page ads, these images were so powerful. And we also thought, the campaign is so versatile. It can go everywhere and it could work in out of home, but we didn't really have a video yet. So what we did was we took the out of home and we made this video to help sell the idea. So this is the little short video that we made to sell the idea, if you want to play it.
premiumbeat.com.
So you can hear it just has a stock track over it. It doesn't even know what URL it's driving to. So we presented that to the global client on the Wednesday, and they're like, okay, green light, make it as fast as you can. So for the next 2 days, really, we didn't sleep. We were up all night. We were messaging all the frontline healthcare workers through Instagram. We had a composer in the UK working on music. And pretty much by Friday night, we had this video made. But it took until Sunday to really align the effort to donate all the product. So by Sunday, then we launched this video. And then this is the final one that ran. First launched in Canada. So that's the TV spot. That one's like 30 seconds long. We had that one done by Tuesday, I think. And we had a traffic, like it was super fast. And then, so proudly, yeah, we launched in Canada, then it launched in the US, and it rolled out to about 20 countries around the world. And this is the response to the campaign. And you'll really see how important the out-of-home was as well.
The campaign is called Courage is Beautiful.
Dove is out with a powerful new ad that is shining the light on our healthcare heroes.
Hashtag Courage is Beautiful bubbled up when Dove soap made it its tagline in a video that went viral.
And it shows nurses and doctors with marks on their faces, bruised from the protective gear.
And they all have something in common, a look of exhaustion, determination. These are the people fighting for you and me.
O contato que foi feito comigo, ele foi feito inicialmente pelo próprio Instagram, que é por onde eu fazia as publicações lá em março, abril.
Most of us at the hospital felt forgotten. After seeing other people in that campaign, it made me feel a sense of unity that other people were going through the exact same thing.
It's just so powerful and made me so proud to be a part of.
Billboards near hospitals worldwide thanked healthcare heroes at work.
I was like, wow, that's me, that's us.
When I saw myself in the campaign for the first time, I remember just tearing up and just feeling like really proud to be part of this global campaign.
Não imaginava também que a minha foto, inclusive, viria a ser a capa do The New York Times.
I understand there's a soap maker
Tributes to healthcare workers.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the one last thing I think is.
And so, you know, we're seeing a great campaign right now from Dove that's about courage. They're running commercials across Snap, and I think that's been a really powerful way that they've been able to show how they're making a difference.
Kudos to Dove, whether they're talking about the shape of your body, the color of your skin, your age. They always do great work, and that's just another example of that.
And yeah, I mentioned Christian and Pam, but obviously it was a big team. And through the creative development, we were also sharing with Ogilvy in London, and then it took a big global effort to roll it out. But again, I'm particularly proud of the impact. When you hear the healthcare workers talking about seeing themselves on the digital out of home, you know, you can't do that in every channel. I would, you know, so that's why I showed this.
Massive impact. Such a beautiful campaign.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing.
The campaign is called Courage.
Oh, not again.
There we go. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Brian. And thank you also to the rest of the panelists for participating in our discussion today. Maybe we have time for one or two questions from the audience. If there are any questions you have for any of our panelists, please do just type that in to the chat and we'll be happy to answer it.
There's a great comment just to shout out Brian, such an impactful campaign that came through the Q&A chat.
So there's
thank you.
So there is a question that came through. How can brands be there for their customers during an economic downturn, especially with the talks of an upcoming recession? I'll leave it open if anyone wants to take it.
Well, I think it's my other panelists are more adequately.
I was going to say one example is, again, it's about doing, not saying. It's not enough to say we feel sorry for you. So 3 days after the Bank of Canada raised the interest rates, the highest interest rate hike in 40 years. Now, one of the clients I work on now is Pizza. And slightly tongue-in-cheek, but actually quite practical. 3 days after the interest rate hike, we launched fixed rate pizza. And Pizza launched a deal for a 4-topping extra large pizza. And they promised they would not raise the price for a year. And they'd keep that deal for a year, even though and so far it's been 6 months and it's still there and they haven't raised it. And it's very popular. And price of cheese is going up, price of all the inputs is going up. And it's been very well received and appreciated by consumers. So again, I would say it's actually brand acts, not sympathy. People don't need sympathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember seeing that campaign and thinking it was really clever. Well, I think that's all we have the time for today. I'd like to thank our panelists again, Amanda, Kelly, Brian, for your time here today and for sharing your really valuable insights and examples here. Just lastly, if you'd like to learn more about out-of-home advertising, you can check out our resources at resources.broadsign.com, where we have campaign case studies, playbooks by industry, and a number of other helpful resources to help you get started. Or if you'd like, you can also book a strategy session with one of our specialists to see how out-of-home can help you reach your campaign goals. You can fill out the form at broadsign.com/contact and someone will get in touch with you. And lastly, be sure to keep an eye out in your inbox later this week for a link to the webinar recording. We'll also actually include maybe everyone's, the panelists' LinkedIn profiles if you want to reach out or want to check it out and connect with them there. I had also mentioned a research study that Broadsign had recently conducted. We'll be sharing those findings with all registrants as well. So thank you again all for being here and enjoy the rest of your week.